Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps integral to growth for early-stage beauty founders and brands. And for today's episode, I'm joined by someone who's been in marketing and digital for about 19 years, Rajaa. Here's a snippet from our conversation.
I would say for early-stage brands, it's really important to be disciplined about what are the goals that you want to get out of a campaign or out of a marketing spend from the get-go, and be very specific and intentional about knowing what that is before you make the investment. Because what I'm seeing now, and as a venture partner, looking at many brands, either in our portfolio or in the landscape, where in current environment, they're running out of cash. They were, financing their growth without really a foundational sound business with true traction.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Rajaa. Most recently, Rajaa was the Chief Revenue Officer for an organic energy drink company. And before that, she was the CMO and CDO for C4 Energy and NutriBullet supplements. She was there for a few years, but has also worked across a variety of companies and industries. Rajaa drove a creative brand transformation when she was the head of brand at Paula's Choice Skincare and led some exciting changes that made the brand top of mind for Gen Z and young millennial consumers on social. On top of that, Rajaa also worked for Amazon as a vendor manager. She has a wide variety of experience, and I thought she could bring an exciting lens to the conversation about the importance of brands nailing their why, especially as they do so in this digital world. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to thank the sponsor for the Beauty from the Shelf podcast, the Emerson Group. Thank you to the Emerson Group for sponsoring the podcast so that we can continue to help give early stage brand founders and leaders the tips and tools to grow from 0 to 20 million. Now let's go ahead and get into today's episode. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into today's episode because I feel like there's so much to cover with your background. I'm so excited to have you on the show. As we heard in your intro, you've worked in a variety of fields. You've done meal delivery, you've worked at Starbucks, you were at Amazon, Paula's Choice, hydration. So all of these categories, I think, have one thing in common, and that is fierce competition. And finding points of differentiation can really be difficult when you are in these highly competitive markets. However, I do believe if a brand has a why, they have a purpose, they have a reason for being, and hopefully a point of differentiation. So I would love to hear from you. Where do you start to define a brand's why? And I'd love for you to just walk us through your process in defining or redefining why a brand is here.
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate to have worked on iconic brands that were more iconic at some time, and we needed to make them more relevant in today's consumer landscape, or brands that needed more awareness and needed to drive and ignite more growth in their journey. What I would say, it always starts with the brand's why. From my CPG marketing days, we lived and died by brand equity pyramids, and those are super important because that's really how you define your why as a brand, your functional, your emotional benefits. What do you want your consumers to think about you? Who is your target consumers that's going to be most apt to be open and responding to your value proposition as a brand? And that is all part of the brand equity pyramid. You call it pyramid, whatever playbook or framework you'd like to use. And I always go back to the beginning. I consider myself a brand builder purist, where you go back and you start from the beginning. What is the reason of being for the brand to exist? And what is it bringing to the consumer or in the marketplace that currently is not being met by other brands, either in the way that it fulfills on a consumer need or the way it fulfills on a value prop that the consumer does not have right now fulfilled by other brands that are currently in the market, or also the go-to-market, the way they get to the consumer from a communication and from a storytelling perspective. And all of that needs to encompass your brand definition and your identity. So I would say that's really how I always start. It's really from the beginning as to what the brand means and that brand equity pyramid, like I said, with all these attributes being very well defined from the get-go.
That's really good. So does that inform the point of differentiation, kind of like that brand's why, or how does that come through in telling the story? Because it feels like that reason for being could be the point of differentiation, but it also could maybe not be. Is that always kind of like the quintessential purpose of a brand, or does it evolve over time? Like, talk to me about that.
Well, I think depending on where the brand was launched, it needs to have a special why. Otherwise, the revenue, the growth is not going to come. The success of the brand is not going to come. So the brand is not differentiated enough from the beginning. And that's also pertaining to its why and its reason of being. It's going to struggle. So that's why I would say defining the brand why, understanding why is that reason for it, that it exists in the market or it exists in the consumer's, environment is absolutely important, because you're always going to have Me Too's that are going to come and start stealing your lunch, And going through that process helps you become more disciplined to really distill what is the key value prop and how crystal clear it is in order to convert in consumption as well as new trial.
I love that, Rajaa. So in speaking about value prop, I'd love to talk about your time when you were at Paula's Choice, because you did some pretty cool things leading growth while you were there. I know that you revised the brand position and leveraged an influencer campaign on a small team, drove growth, and, the brand is still seeing a lot of success still today. So I'd love to kind of, as you talk about value proposition, this is almost like a great case study for us to talk through this. What were some of the factors or identifiers that you noticed that made you say a change is needed? Like, we need to do something different here at Paula's Choice. We need to redefine the brand position and, we need to change it up.
So when I got to Paula's Choice, it was in June of 2018. Skincare was a category that was hot. Drunk Elephant was doing amazing. I think they were already at 300,000 followers on Instagram, and they were only existing for a few years then. Paula's Choice Skincare has been around for 24 years when I got there. It had a product that was a cult favorite, being very clinical, very, fact-based, scientific research-based, but it lacked relevancy and emotion with that new consumer that was driving the category growth of skincare, which was Gen Zs as well as young millennials. But the brand was really strong with more Gen Xers and older demographics because it was launched 24 years prior. And also the look and feel of the brand just looked a little bit more clinical, not as, personable and accessible for that new consumer that needed to rediscover the brand, or know it, or, get to consume it and know about it for the first time. So that's why I realized that the website was not serving that purpose. It was not relevant. It was not conveying the value prop of transparency that the brand stood for, scientific research, science-backed ingredients that the brand stood for, effective results transforming skin that the brand stood for. But it was very much a direct response. A lot of the product, the marketing mix that was used, very much bottom funnel, meaning here's a 20% off coupon, buy the 2% BHA, which was the top, hero product at the time. I still think today, which I still love and still use. So, but it lacked that emotion. And consumers that were new to skincare, that were coming and driving the growth of this category, wanted to know your story, the purpose of the brand, what it stood for in a way that was extremely simple. So that is why I realized we need to do a brand transformation from every sense of the term for this brand, the way it looked, from the casting to the way it came to the consumer in terms of marketing, communication, PR, experiential, how it came about in stores, because we were in Nordstrom stores at the time. We didn't have Sephora. And we also had only 70,000 followers on Instagram for a brand that was around for 24 years. And so all of this prompted this transformation. And with my team at the time, we had 3 people in the brand team. I can't believe how long ago was that? Only 5 years. And now I know the teams are much bigger, especially after the Unilever acquisition that happened 2 years ago. We started working on developing a new brand campaign that now stands for the tagline that they have, which is Beauty Begins with Truth. And it was a global brand campaign We found an amazing agency that was small, starting, but had a very strong pedigree with people who worked at The Gap, who worked at Sephora, with other beauty brands that were indie at the time. And we built this beautiful campaign that really was night and day for the consumers and that made it much more accessible and attractive to a younger consumer. And then we started, creating these beautiful unboxing, send-outs that we would send to influencers. When I had started there, we were sending products in a white box that had no branding and had no emotion. So all of that started to come to life because then we took that brand why in with the expression of beauty begins with truth and that campaign with the beautiful visuals and brought it consistently across all the marketing touch points, whether it's the way we did outreach to influencers, to the way they discovered the products when they got a send out reaching their doorsteps, or when they unboxed it over on social, or where the consumer got the product, and also doing pop-ups at Nordstrom and other retail outlets at the time when DTC brands were really just starting in that adventure of how do you drive awareness at scale. And doing that in a way that was consistent and that really obeyed your brand why and your brand definition and your equity was absolutely key. And in a matter of a year and 4 months, we became the number 9 most talked about brand in social and digital, according to the Tribe Report, which is the Bible for many beauty brands, measuring their earned media as well as their digital and social impressions. And when we started that effort a year and a half before, we were number 65, number 60 was the most we could get. And we ended up doing that under less than $1 million in brand marketing budget, which included influencer, organic social, creative production, and recruiting influencers, which we were able to build from we had about 20 micro influencers and a couple of thought leaders to 700 in that time frame. And the brand exploded and everyone was calling me, my God, my cousin's seeing the brand on social. When that makes you feel good, when the CEO, the CMO, everyone who's been working at the company for years, their family and friends are telling them that they're now seeing the brand on social channels.
Yeah, it sounds like you nailed it. Like, it's like, you're like, okay, we want to attract a new target audience. So we're going to meet that target audience in a place where they are. It sounded like you honed in and said, we want to grow our following on Instagram because this is a huge way for us to grow. And then from there, you talk to that consumer in the way that you knew they would like to be spoken to. And so I remember when all of those unboxing campaigns were happening, and it was like, influencers were just getting things and opening things up. I mean, we're recording this right now, very close to Christmas timing. So a very heavy gifting season. So I know myself, I look forward to opening things this time of year. So I can imagine that that's something that, folks feel and it makes you say, oh, I want to try this brand. Oh, I like this. This was fun.
Yeah.
But you also had those brand principles throughout. It sounds like that consistency also allowed you to show up in a way where it was just resonating with the consumer.
It was resonating in making your marketing spend way more effective than our CAC, cost of acquisition. It went down by 72% for new customers during that time by using the creative. And it was the first time when I was like, oh my God, we're making a gamble. We may not see the fruit of sales right away from doing this brand awareness and brand marketing exercise, but we literally saw it from a 9-month to a year timeframe. And went from the brand growing at single digit to mid double digit growth in a year and a half.
That's
which
huge.
Made the brand get ready for a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, one of the biggest one in skincare history, to Unilever 9 months later after we did that feat.
Wow. And when you say all of that, it kind of makes sense. If you weren't following things then, it's like, oh, I see why Unilever might have wanted to make that choice. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about the influencers that you chose. Can you talk to me about choosing the right influencers? I know when I talk to some brand founders now, I'm not sure if the landscape has changed a bit in terms of what influencers look like now versus then in 2018, but would just love to hear from you how you chose the influencers and made sure that they were the right ones for Paula's choice at that time.
Yeah, I love that question so much. It's true, the influencer landscape changes so much. I could see now, being a beauty and a skincare junkie still to this day, going on TikTok, seeing how things have changed there so much. and which brands are winning and which ones are not. It's fascinating. But there are a few principles. Like I said, I'm a brand purist. And when it comes to marketing, and even whether it's digital marketing or just brand building, there's principles that never fail. That playbook that we developed at Paula's Choice Skincare, I took that same playbook and I brought it to C4 Energy, where we did the same thing again, went from few influencers to 2,000 and built a huge brand awareness that resulted in an amazing outcome for the brand then. But for Paula's Choice, I would say those principles still are the ones that I started with, and I see them time and time again bear fruit. Is that choosing the influencer needs to go hand in hand with how authentic your brand shows up with that influencer. We were very lucky. Ideally, we have consumers that now became influencers that knew of the brand before. So they've talked about it organically. They were not prompted nor paid. And that's how really we were able to be strategically very choiceful about which influencer we approached or which one we paid more or we remunerated better, if that makes sense, you know? So that helped really narrow down the pool by a lot to really focus on the ones that we're going to drive, because the more authentic they are, the better the content is and the better it performs, whether it's in brand impressions or it's in revenue conversions. So that same principle is always the way we looked at all tiers. And also we adopted a multiple tier approach where we just didn't want the influencers that, were like the millions or 2 millions. And actually the brand was not coveted enough to be able to get those influencers to be interested, because we were not a known brand. We were not a hot brand. Dark Elephant was the craze. Herbivore was the craze at the time, Tatcha before its acquisition was the craze. And we needed to become much more coveted. And so it was a better ROI for us to focus on some of the macros, the ones that had 100 to 400,000, 500,000 followers, but knew of the brand or already posted about it. That's where we were able to see the best ROI. And we had the best chance of success to even be of interest to them. And I always like to work with folks and influencers, just like in my personal or, professional life. Go to and work with people and partners that really want you, that will celebrate you. Like any consumer, you're not going to keep forcing yourself on a consumer that is not interested in your brand. Just I'm not going to keep forcing myself at a influencer that is not really open-minded or is not going to do a good job, because that's why we see so many brands spend so much money in influencer. It does not pay off because the way they select the influencer is flawed or is not strategic enough. And it's not aligned with the brand purpose, value, and DNA.
That's so good that a lot of this kind of comes back to who is the brand at the core, what are the values, and that's what drove you forward. So you also mentioned, humble brag, that, you saw some significant growth, double-digit growth 9 to 12 months after you did this social campaign. And you also talked about having similar results when you were at C4. So with the saturation, I guess I'll say, of social media, what additional creative approaches can early stage brands take to capture the attention of their target audience and really foster engagement in today's environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, even for Paula's Choice Skincare, even if it was known bigger brand at the time, doing over $100 million, but growing modestly until we drove that transformation, which really made its revenue and growth go over the top, the budget for brand building was still very small. It was not a big brand then. I mean, it was not owned by a big conglomerate. So I had to become very entrepreneurial in the way I drove disrupted awareness for a brand that is in a highly competitive category. And I would say for early stage brands, it's really important to be disciplined about what are the goals that you want to get out of a campaign or out of a marketing spend from the get-go, and be very specific and intentional about knowing what that is before you make the investment. Because what I'm seeing now, and as a venture partner, looking at many brands, either in our portfolio or in the landscape, where in current environment, they're running out of cash. They were, financing their growth without really a foundational sound business with true traction. And I think that it's what I would say early stage founder, business owners, marketers need to be aware is that you have to know what really makes your consumer want to buy the product. Why doesn't your proposition is attractive to one segment of consumer versus another? And that's where we need to double down on in terms of spend, because that's where you're going to see your 2, 3x return on investment, which is something very important in this landscape that we're in where cash is scarce, investment is not flowing as it used to, raising is a nightmare. And you have to go back to the basic, which I think is very exciting. Because like I said, doing the fundamentals right never fails. And having the right business with strong fundamentals is really what's going to help you drive growth at a very cost-effective rate of marketing.
That's really good. Back to the basics. So I'd love to understand, we're talking a lot about marketing, and I love talking about kind of these core brand principles because I do think a lot of branding has gone a little bit off the hinges, which is okay. But I think a lot of these core principles get you back to that consistent repeatability and a growth that might not necessarily be super fast, but that will get you to where you want to go long term for sustainable stakes. But I think that social media has also introduced this idea of virality. I'm not sure if it existed really before social media, but because I feel like the reach wasn't the same. When we just had traditional print and TV ads, you couldn't share the way that, consumers can share now. So now there is this added element of virality, right? Where sometimes marketing teams have something to do with it and other times they don't. And I know that this has happened a few times in your career where, things have gone viral. And I know that there are benefits and there are downsides. So I'd love for you to just talk about virality. Can you plan for it and kind of have this is what I would do if I go viral? What are the benefits and the downsides? And then also, how can marketing teams really capitalize on virality so that, it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving?
Exactly. You said it beautifully, Monique. I would say it's really, again, when you have the fundamentals right, and you're right, I had viral moments in my marketing career, very honored to have lived through that when we were doing that steady work, at Paula's Choice, putting the fundamentals and kind of fundamental actions in terms of how to build an integrated marketing team, the right go-to-market for new product launches. Doing the fundamentals right is what helped get that viral moment when Kylie Jenner had the 2% BHA in her BoxyCharm. Literally, it was a month before I had gotten another job and left Paula's Choice, and it was such a beautiful gift. And we spent $10,000 for that placement. And Kylie Jenner had it in her stories. It was crazy. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Cardi B's stylist also used 2% BHA a few weeks later. So that's why doing the right brand building where you're understanding your brand why, you're talking about your point of difference in a way that's really intentional in your go-to-market, in your integrated marketing effort are concerted, are well-structured, and are very much disciplined through all the consumer touch points, those viral moments will come. But when you don't have the fundamentals right and you don't have the right basic steps in order to build a great marketing plan, great brand campaign, the right marketing mix and media mix that's going to be serving you the best at where your brand is and at which stage it's at in its journey, you're not going to be able to get those viral moments. And same thing, it happened again with C4 when we had Justin Field, the Chicago Bears quarterbacks, had his name called during their draft, and he was drinking his C4, and he was a rookie when I signed him with my team for really an amazing deal.
What foresight you had to say this rookie is going to be a good guy to sign.
4 months before he got,
right? We're going to take a bet on him. I mean, in that athletic space, if you pick that right draft pick on the campaign side, on that marketing side, it can really bode well.
It was unreal.
And I guess it's similar too for beauty, right? If you pick the right influencer, if you pick the right upcoming star, upcoming songwriter, you know what I mean? These people, again, if they're already using these products,
yes,
it can really be a great partnership, if you will, where it's you already like this, you already embody the brand values, And now you're getting paid to talk about something you already like and use.
Exactly. And those moments, they become viral, then they get picked up on Twitter or on IG or on TikTok. And then you layer on the PR machine on it. And it doesn't have to, I say machine. I think PR is one of those amazing things. And I think, my friend Tia said that in the episode with you, is really such an amazing lever when you layer it on social and influencer in a concerted effort that's truly a 360 approach. And that's why I've seen one of the big difference makers that I've seen at Paula's Choice Skincare, or at C4, or at, Snap Kitchen, when I had the meal delivery company that I had worked at. The PR element is so key, but everything needs to hit at once. And sometimes marketing teams are not set up to do that. That's why I was a more involved CMO at those jobs, because they were very early on in their journey where I didn't have the fundamentals set, and I had to create them in order to make sure that we were able to get these results. And it's not easy, but it's very much something that founders and early stage companies can start doing from the get-go.
I absolutely love that. And we'll definitely say here, if you are listening and you didn't hear that episode with Tia, there's a lot of things that you mentioned that I feel like layer very well to what Tia was saying as she was talking a little bit more tactically about some of those different marketing strategies. So thank you for mentioning that. I feel like we covered all the things that I wanted to talk about today. So I just want to give you the opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to share with the audience, share with early stage beauty brands as they're looking to grow and build based on the things that you've learned, feel free. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Monique. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me on your podcast. I think it's such a huge value that you bring into the founder and beauty founder community. I would say maybe some last few words that I'd like to part with is stick to the core value of your brand, of why you thought about it in the first place before you launched it. Have integrity with those values and make sure that you keep honoring your core consumers that brought you to this stage or got you the first success, because that is absolutely key before moving on into a new target or moving on into a new channel. I think I see that more often than not, where brands grow, and it's so exciting when you start seeing the revenue grow and the virality and the buzz, like you say, and you start stretching yourself too thin, or you start taking on too many new categories that maybe the brand is not known for, or channels that you may not have the expertise, or they cost too much capital to be able to develop or be successful at. I would say stay steady and keep building, and things will pan out. And it's really an exciting time that we're in.
Thank you so much. What great advice. Oh, Rajaa, I'm so happy that I was able to get you to come onto the podcast so that you could lend your knowledge to all of the audience, the folks that listen. So thank you for coming on here and for sharing all the things that you've learned. I know that it's going to be helpful, because these are the things that sometimes the founders, they have the ideas, but don't necessarily come from traditional marketing backgrounds, don't necessarily come from CPG. And so I think it's important to kind of hear that some of those core tenets are still really important in growing a sustainable brand in the future and understanding your purpose for being. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Monique.
Thank you again to Rajaa for joining me on the podcast today. I absolutely loved all of the insights that she shared about getting back to the basics, as we share a lot here on the podcast, but also going through those motions so that you are really building a sustainable brand. If you found this episode helpful, I encourage you to share it with a colleague or friend, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps to make sure that the podcast gets visibility to other people who could benefit from these tips. Thank you again for listening today, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.